What happened in Tunisia in 1987 was not merely a smooth transfer of power or a medical removal of an aging president. It was a pivotal moment that redrew Tunisia's political map for decades to come. On that cold November night, no gunshots were heard and no tanks rolled through the streets, yet the ground shook politically beneath everyone's feet. Bourguiba, the founder of the republic and architect of the modern state, found himself trapped inside his palace, stripped of his powers, after his own protégé, in deadly silence, decided to take his portrait down from the walls. The coup was not a sudden act. It was preceded by a weary state, internal divisions, and a tense domestic scene that made the continuation of the historic leader more of a threat than a guarantee. Was Ben Ali truly Tunisia's savior, or merely the heir to power with foreign approval and domestic silence? And was the coup really medical, or was it a white coup carried out under the cover of the Constitution and blessed by certain capitals? In this video, we'll dive into the dark backstage of the night Bourguiba fell. We'll reconstruct the scene and unpack the details one by one. So stay with us till the end. And don't forget to support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel to get all the latest updates. Habib Bourguiba was born on August 3, 1903, in Monastir, a city on Tunisia's eastern coast, into a modest family in a conservative, tradition-bound society. He was the youngest of his siblings, but from an early age he showed intelligence, ambition, and an innate sense of leadership. After finishing high school, Bourguiba chose an unconventional path. He traveled to France to study law and political science at the University of Paris, a decision that would mark the beginning of his intellectual and political formation. In the French capital, his mind opened to liberal thought currents and modern concepts of the state, law, and society, amid heated debates about colonialism, freedom, and justice. This deep exposure to European, particularly French, intellectual life was not just an academic experience, it was the birth of a new political vision that Bourguiba carried back with him to Tunisia in the late 1920s. Upon his return, he was no longer just a university graduate seeking a legal career. He was a man driven by a national project and a comprehensive vision for modernization. In 1934, he founded the Neo-Destour, New Constitutional Liberal Party, breaking away from the traditional leadership of the nationalist movement. He adopted a pragmatic discourse and a strategy based on smart negotiation and gradual political accumulation rather than direct violent confrontation. Despite repeated arrests and exiles to France and Mediterranean islands, he remained steadfast and succeeded in turning Tunisia's cause into an international issue, earning him broad Arab and global respect. In 1956, the goal he had fought for over decades was finally achieved: Tunisia's independence from French colonial rule. A year later, he abolished the monarchy and declared the republic, becoming its first president and opening a new chapter in Tunisian history. From the very start, Bourguiba launched an unprecedented reformist project in the region. He restructured the education system, built schools and institutes, raised enrollment rates, developed health care to include marginalized groups, and issued the Personal Status Code, which banned polygamy, legalized divorce, and elevated the status of women in society. He built a civil state with a secular character, grounded in the rule of law and institutions rather than tribal or religious allegiance. Thanks to these policies, Bourguiba became a symbol of modernization, not only in Tunisia, but across the Arab world, earning the title the Supreme Fighter, Al-Mujahid al-Akbar, as he embodied both the leadership of liberation and the leadership of nation-building. Yet this leadership, which began as reformist and progressive, carried within it the seeds of a dangerous transformation that would reveal itself years later. By the 1970s, signs of absolute power had begun to solidify within the walls of the Carthage palace. It became clear that Bourguiba, the man who had led Tunisia to independence, could no longer tolerate any voice that paralleled his own. The opposition was marginalized, and state institutions were increasingly managed directly from the president's office, with little regard for checks, balances, or institutional independence. In 1975, the Tunisian parliament passed an exceptional law granting Bourguiba the title of President for Life. From that point onward, genuine elections ceased to exist, and political life turned into an empty stage devoid of real content. The media was completely subdued. Journalism lost its independence, and political parties were either dissolved or forcibly merged into the ruling party. By the early 1980s, the problem was no longer just the absence of democracy. It had become a personal and health crisis at the very top of power. Bourguiba, now well into his 80s, was physically frail and showing signs of senility and loss of focus. His decisions became erratic to a worrying degree. In the span of a single week, he could dismiss a minister, then reappoint him, order the execution of an opponent, then retract it, make firm decisions, only to later deny ever taking them. The most dangerous of his actions during this period was issuing direct orders to execute leaders of the Ennahda movement without following the normal judicial procedures. This created an atmosphere of fear within the corridors of power, not only because of the president's behavior, but also due to the growing risk of civil unrest or an uncontrollable popular explosion. All this was unfolding amid a severe economic crisis. The currency had lost much of its value, unemployment was rising, student and social protests were spreading, and the gap between the capital and the interior regions was widening to alarming levels. At this stage, Bourguiba was no longer viewed as a symbol of modernization, but rather as a burden on the state, not the inspiring leader, but the looming danger threatening the very republic he had founded. The circle of decision-makers began to shrink, and whispers started to spread, in low voices, about the need to save the state, even if that meant removing the leader himself. Amid the gradual collapse of state institutions and growing chaos at the center of power, a small circle of men quietly emerged from the shadows to organize what would later be known as the White Coup of 1987. These figures were not outsiders to the system, but influential insiders, key state actors weaving the threads of a major political transformation. At the forefront was Kamal El Taif, the man of the shadows, long known for his unseen but pivotal roles within the Tunisian state. He was close to the highest decision-making circles and maintained a powerful network within the security apparatus. Alongside him stood General Habib Amar, commander of the National Guard, a disciplined institutional man who had risen through the ranks to become a critical player in the balance of power. They were joined by Hedi Bakouche, the Minister of Social Affairs, known for his political prudence and cautious tactics, and Colonel Mohammed Chakri, one of the most prominent officers in the Ministry of the Interior. Finally came the most crucial player, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, the Minister of the Interior at the time, whose name was gaining strength, particularly after his success in containing the January 1984 uprisings. The turning point came when the group learned, through Saida Sassi, the president's niece, that Bourguiba was preparing to dismiss Ben Ali and appoint Mohamed Saya as prime minister in his place. This information did not lead to hesitation. It sounded an alarm that pushed the group to act immediately. They put forward the idea of a medical coup, a scenario based on Article 57 of the Tunisian constitution, which allowed for the transfer of power to the prime minister if the president were declared incapable of performing his duties. The plan appeared smart and constitutional on the surface, but in essence, it was a soft coup, a quiet, calculated seizure of power designed to avoid internal confrontation or international condemnation. The operation was carried out with extreme secrecy. Every potential leak was sealed, and any unreliable figure within the president's security circle was sidelined. The stage was meticulously set for a coup that would unfold in absolute calm, but with surgical precision. On the evening of November 6, 1987, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali convened a meeting with the top leaders of Tunisia's security apparatus at the Ministry of the Interior. At first glance, it seemed like a routine gathering. but in reality, it was a war room overseeing the end of a 30-year era. At the same time, the decisive medical report was being finalized, carefully worded, to declare that President Habib Bourguiba was suffering from a permanent physical and mental incapacity that rendered him unable to fulfill his duties. Some doctors, however, refused to sign the report, arguing they had not examined the president in a long time. Their objections were met with immense pressure, sometimes through persuasion, other times through intimidation, until they finally yielded and signed. With that, the medical file was closed, providing the formal legitimacy for the coup of November 7th. As night fell, a special commando unit led by General Habib Ammar quietly left the Al-Awina military base. Their destination? The Carthage Palace. The operation proceeded with absolute secrecy. Upon arrival, the unit encountered no resistance. The presidential guards were discreetly withdrawn, and Bourguiba's wing of the palace was sealed off. The president was never informed of what was happening. He was not awakened. No orders were explained. The door was simply closed behind him, and new guards, strangers to him, stood watch outside. In a calculated moment, General Ammar lifted his radio and uttered the words, "Congratulations, Mr. President." Those words, spoken in the darkness of that night, marked the beginning of a new era and the end of an entire chapter in Tunisia's history. At dawn, precisely 5 a.m. on November 7, 1987, the national radio broadcast a brief statement in the voice of Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. Given the advanced age of President Habib Bourguiba and the deterioration of his health, and pursuant to Article 57 of the Constitution, I have, with God's help, assumed the duties of President of the Republic. That short message was the official announcement of a bloodless coup. A takeover carried out through legal instruments and blessed by the security establishment, without a single shot fired. The Tunisian people awoke to complete surprise. No gunfire, no clashes, no demonstrations in the streets. Only an old president who had suddenly vanished, and a new one who had quietly slipped into power. As for Bourguiba, after his removal, he was immediately transferred to his home in Monastir, where he was placed under strict house arrest. He was not allowed to go out, nor was he given the chance to bid farewell to power. He lived in isolation until his death. Thus ended the night of November 7, 1987. A coup without blood, but not without consequence. No sooner had Zine El Abidine Ben Ali declared himself President of the Republic than he began shaping the features of the new regime with a reassuring tone. His speeches carried slogans that deeply resonated with the Tunisian public at the time. No more injustice. Towards a new era, political reform and democracy. It was clear that Ben Ali wanted to present himself as a moderate alternative to Habib Bourguiba, especially after the long years of one-man rule and the health decline of the deposed president. A new page seemed to have opened in Tunisia's history. Yet, those promises quickly turned into a facade for a tightly controlled security state. Within just a few years, public freedoms were gradually eroded, and the mechanisms of authoritarian rule were rebuilt, only this time with more structure and sophistication. The Islamist opposition, particularly the Ennahda movement, faced systematic repression, including waves of arrests and political trials. The media was brought under direct censorship, and the limited margin of free expression that had been promised disappeared. Political life became hollow. Elections were staged performances devoid of real competition or choice. In essence, Ben Ali's republic became a disguised continuation of the Bourguibist state, but dressed in a more disciplined security uniform with greater dominance by the intelligence services. Over time, Ben Ali's system solidified as an unchallenged reality, enduring for 23 uninterrupted years, until the Tunisian Revolution of 2011 finally ended that rigid chapter in the country's political history. The coup of November 7th was not merely a smooth constitutional transfer of power. Behind the official statement citing President Bourguiba's medical incapacity lay a web of secret dealings carefully woven in closed rooms, along confidential communication lines, and through diplomatic back channels. Kamel El Taif, the influential businessman who had long stayed away from the spotlight, later revealed that he was the mastermind behind that night's events. He was the one who proposed Ben Ali's name, worked to recall him from his post as Tunisian ambassador to Poland, and paved the way for his appointment as Minister of the Interior, then Prime Minister, as a prelude to the ultimate step. The most striking part of his later revelations concerned the foreign dimension. According to multiple reports and testimonies from former security officers, there had been direct coordination with the U.S. Embassy in Tunis. Washington, wary of sudden instability in North Africa, reportedly expressed tacit support for a safe transition on the condition that it would not provoke internal turmoil or empower rising Islamist movements. Although Ben Ali was not a popular figure at the time, the new Tunisian regime gained swift international acceptance, perhaps because of how quietly events unfolded or because the alternative seemed, at that moment, far more dangerous. Behind the scenes, however, a contingency plan had been prepared. If the coup failed, said one former Interior Ministry officer, its key figures were to be evacuated abroad, specifically to Algeria or France. As for General Habib Ammar, who carried out the plan on the ground by moving National Guard units toward the Carthage palace, he later offered a blunt justification. Had we not acted, the state would have collapsed within weeks. Bourguiba's decisions were erratic, and the country was on the verge of explosion. Yet despite all justifications, the files were never fully closed. Even today, one question continues to echo through Tunisia's political memory and corridors of power. Was what happened on November 7th an act of salvation from inevitable chaos, or a soft coup, orchestrated under domestic and foreign sponsorship, dressed in legal formality, but in essence, simply replacing one ruler with another, without the people's will? And so, in a single night, everything changed. Habib Bourguiba, the founding father of modern Tunisia, ended his days isolated behind closed doors, while Zine El Abidine Ben Ali emerged as the new face of power, delivering reassuring speeches and promises of reform that soon proved to be nothing more than the continuation of a quieter yet tighter authoritarian regime. And with that, we come to the end of today's video. Don't miss the chance to stay updated. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive all our latest content.